All right, generally speaking, there's glands all throughout the GI tract, okay? And the reason for that is because mucus is a necessity, all right? Remember that mucus is our biochemical protection, right? If we put mucus across a surface, then what's in the lumen has a harder time interacting with the living cells of the epithelium, right? So we have glands in both the mucosa and in the deeper structures, like we saw. You know, some of the glands are deep, some of them are just simply one cell, the goblet cells. Secretion in general, this is the in general throughout the tract slide. Secretion in general is stimulated when there's stuff in that part of the intestine. So that kind of makes sense, right? If there's materials there, there's the potential for damage. So mucus secretion is going to be increased, right? Also, presence of materials in a particular segment, well, that's digestion is necessary and absorption is happening, right? So we're going to have increased secretion there. Ultimately, it's the enteric nervous system that is managing secretion. Just like we have seen throughout this system, the brain is not in charge, right? The enteric nervous system is controlling not only the motility, but the secretion as well. Some of the inputs to that nervous system, tactile stimulation, you know, things are moving across the membrane, there are free nerve endings there. Chemical irritation, distension, all of those things happen as materials pass through the GI tract, right? So they're responded to by the enteric nervous system with an increase in secretion. Generally speaking, the parasympathetic nervous system stimulates GI tract secretion from across the board. Its effects are greater early in the tract than late in the tract. In other words, parasympathetic has its biggest effects in the jejunum and duodenum and has less effects in the colon, right? So bigger effects proximal as opposed to distal. Sympathetic nervous system stimulation has a mixed effect, okay? So if all you have is sympathetic, in other words, a fight or flight response, that tends to increase secretion. Now, this isn't increasing secretion to promote digestion and absorption, right? Because that would be a silly thing to do if you're fighting off a mountain lion. Instead, the secretion bump that we get with sympathetic is to protect the GI tract from, to increase secretion to make it a little bit more durable to injury and damage. Now, when the sympathetic is stimulated along with the parasympathetic, then we usually get a reduction in output of glands. So in other words, if you're digesting and you have a sympathetic nervous system stimulation, the tendency is to reduce the output of secretion. In other words, pause digestion and absorption while you deal with whatever the mountain lion problem is, right? Now, the GI hormones also are going to affect these glands, right? So we have both stimulators and inhibitors that work throughout the tract. So the hormones, which hormone is secreted, is going to determine whether it's a stimulator or an inhibitor, okay, like that table we looked at a few days ago. All right, so gland secretion happens in the same way that that most secretion in the body happens. And I believe we talked briefly about this in like the first week. So that's been a long time ago, and much learning has occurred between then and now, right? So we'll just review that just a little bit. So this is our make-believe cell, right? It's exaggerated to show the structure, okay? Capillary basement membrane. We got a little bit of a nerve fiber in there. Okay, so when this cell is stimulated to secrete by the nervous system fiber, what is that really, what's happening? Okay, well, the materials this cell is going to make have to be delivered first. So that's coming in through the capillaries. The mitochondria, which there are a lot of in secretory cells, okay, the mitochondria are going to produce ATP because typically materials that are secreted take energy to produce. right? After the exam, we're going to talk about the difference between anabolic and catabolic, right? Anabolic is building something, catabolic is breaking it down. Anabolism is expensive. You have to put energy in, right? It's true in the macroscopic world too. It costs a lot more to build a house than it does to tear one down, right? So anabolism is expensive. We need a lot of ATP, so we need a lot of mitochondria to do that job. The ATP they produce is primarily consumed by the ribosomes and the endoplasmic reticulum. Ribosomes, you'll remember, that's where proteins are made, right? Endoplasmic reticulum is where proteins are shaped and many other kinds of materials are made. In other words, non-protein materials are made. Remember that we go from endoplasmic reticulum to Golgi complex or Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus is sort of final assembly of whatever's going to be secreted. Once those materials are completed in the Golgi apparatus, they're put into a vesicle. That vesicle then moves along the cytoskeleton of the cell and then is released. So the secretion technically happens when the vesicle binds to the membrane and releases its contents into the external environment, right? So usually the trigger for that secretion is calcium, right? Just like we see in nerve cells, just like we see in muscle cells. So the nerve fiber is going to have a tendency to increase calcium permeability. That increase in calcium permeability increases the connection of the vesicles to the membrane and releasing the material. So we call that exocytosis, and it is the primary mechanism of secretion. Now, one of the things to remember is what is secreted, what's made is molecules, right? Those molecules interact with water to make different things happen. So for example, mucus, all mucus is, it's mostly water with a little bit of protein that has a tendency to change water's characteristics, right? It makes water sticky to itself, so it kind of sticks together and gets kind of slimy and stringy, right? What did the molecule that's made changed the water into mucus, right? So when you think about mucus production, what's coming out of these vesicles is not mucus, all right? What's coming out of the vesicles are the molecules that are going to turn water into mucus, right? Because we got plenty of water around. This confuses people and animals sometimes because some animals will make slime as a defense mechanism, right? And like there's a particular fish called a hagfish. Anybody ever heard of a hagfish? It's a nasty, terrible thing. It looks, they're like hundreds of millions of years old. But like if you take a hagfish and put it in a bucket, after about 35 seconds, the entire bucket is slime. And people think, well, how did a small fish fill a bucket with slime? Well, it didn't. It released molecules that turned the water into slime. See? So it's the same idea behind mucus, and now you just learned about hagfish, which you didn't know today. So there's your thing you learned, right? You can quit today.